Some people believe a badge can silence a grieving mother. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The final notes of Amazing Grace drifted gently beneath the high wooden ceiling of St. Matthew's Church in Baltimore, Maryland, blending with the quiet rustle of black suits and the soft sound of rain tapping against stained glass windows. White lilies surrounded the polished oak casket at the front of the sanctuary, filling the air with their delicate fragrance. Framed beside the flowers was a smiling photograph of 26-year-old Marcus Carter, his eyes bright with quiet kindness, frozen forever in a moment that now felt painfully distant. In the very first pew sat his mother, Evelyn Carter, her black dress simple, elegant, and untouched by luxury. Her hands rested calmly on a single white rose across her lap. She had not spoken for nearly 20 minutes. She simply watched the closed casket, her face carrying the unbearable stillness that only a parent who had buried a child could understand. Friends, neighbors, church members, and former classmates filled every pew. Many had come because Marcus had volunteered at community centers, coached neighborhood basketball, and never passed a stranger without offering help. Others came because the circumstances surrounding his death had left too many unanswered questions. Yet today was not supposed to be about rumors or investigations. It was supposed to be about saying goodbye. Reverend Samuel Brooks stepped toward the pulpit, his Bible resting gently in one hand. His voice was warm, steady, and filled with compassion. Today we remember a son whose greatest gift was kindness. Before he could continue, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church swung open with a deep echo that rolled through the sanctuary. Conversation stopped instantly. Heads turned together. The choir fell silent before finishing the final verse. 3 uniformed police officers entered, their polished boots clicking sharply across the marble floor. Behind them walked Officer Daniel Whitaker, tall, broad-shouldered, his expression hard and unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. Rainwater still clung to his dark blue uniform as he scanned the room with cold precision. Nobody moved. Nobody understood why police had come to a funeral. Whitaker never slowed his pace. He marched directly down the center aisle, ignoring the grieving family, ignoring the pastor, ignoring every pair of stunned eyes following him. The silence grew heavier with every step until it seemed to press against the walls themselves. When he finally stopped beside the first pew, he looked down at Evelyn Carter without the slightest trace of sympathy. "Evelyn Carter?" he asked, though it was obvious he already knew exactly who she was. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes from her son's casket and met his gaze. There was no fear in her expression, only exhaustion deeper than words could ever carry. "Yes," she answered quietly. Whitaker reached inside his jacket and removed a folded document. "You are being detained for questioning in connection with an ongoing investigation." Gasps rippled through the church like a sudden gust of wind. Marcus's aunt covered her mouth. A young cousin stood halfway from his seat before another relative gently pulled him back down. Reverend Brooks stepped forward carefully, keeping his voice respectful. "Officer, this is her son's funeral. Surely this can wait." Whitaker didn't even look at him. "Step aside, Reverend. This is official police business." Every eye in the sanctuary remained fixed on Evelyn. Yet she did not argue. She did not plead. She simply looked once more toward Marcus's casket, gently tightened her fingers around the white rose resting in her lap, and rose to her feet with a dignity so quiet that even the falling rain outside seemed to pause and listen. The white rose slipped gently from Evelyn Carter's hand onto the polished wooden floor, its petals remaining perfectly intact despite the quiet fall. She looked at it for only a second before lifting her chin again. Around her, the sanctuary seemed suspended between disbelief and sorrow. No one understood why a grieving mother was being taken away before her son's farewell had even ended. Yet Evelyn's breathing remained slow and measured, almost as though she had spent a lifetime learning that panic only handed power to those who sought it. She quietly folded her hands in front of her and nodded once. "May I say goodbye to my son first?" she asked. Her voice carried no anger, only the weary grace of someone whose heart had already endured more than words could measure. Officer Daniel Whitaker glanced toward the casket for less than a heartbeat before answering. "No, we are leaving now." A soft murmur spread through the congregation. Some lowered their eyes. Others exchanged uncertain glances, wondering whether speaking up would only make things worse. Reverend Samuel Brooks stepped closer, his expression filled with concern. "Officer, there are children here. There is family here. Please show a little compassion." Whitaker's jaw tightened, but his attention never drifted from Evelyn. "This investigation has priority." Evelyn slowly removed the small black gloves she had been wearing and placed them carefully on the front pew beside her Bible. Every movement was deliberate, calm, almost ceremonial. The quiet dignity of those motions somehow made the room feel even heavier. An elderly woman sitting near the aisle whispered through tears, "Lord, give her strength." Evelyn offered the woman a faint smile before turning back toward the front of the church. Marcus's photograph rested beside the casket exactly where she had left it earlier that morning. His smile seemed untouched by everything unfolding around him. She remembered helping him tie his first necktie before middle school graduation. She remembered cheering from aluminum bleachers every Saturday during high school basketball season. She remembered him bringing groceries to elderly neighbors without ever telling anyone afterward. The memories came in gentle flashes, each one warmer than the rain falling outside. They reminded her that Marcus had always believed character mattered most when life became unfair. Those lessons echoed quietly inside her now. She refused to let this moment become louder than the love they had gathered to honor. Several church members instinctively stepped into the aisle, not to challenge the officers, but simply to stand closer to Evelyn. A young woman from the choir reached for her hand. Evelyn squeezed it softly before letting go. "Please stay with Marcus," she whispered. "He deserves every prayer today." The choir director lowered her eyes, unable to answer through the emotion tightening her throat. Near the entrance, gray afternoon light spilled through the open church doors, mixing with the scent of rain and fresh flowers. Outside, television vans had begun arriving after hearing rumors of police activity. Camera operators stood behind yellow umbrellas, unaware of the story unfolding inside. None of them recognized the quiet woman standing beside the first pew. To them, she appeared to be another grieving mother caught in unfortunate circumstances. That anonymity did not trouble Evelyn. In fact, she had carefully protected it for years. Very few people in her own neighborhood knew what she did for a living. She preferred grocery shopping alone, attending church without an escort, and volunteering at the legal aid clinic without introducing herself by title. Today she had come carrying nothing except family photographs, funeral programs, and a mother's broken heart. As Officer Whitaker gestured toward the aisle once again, Evelyn took one final look at Marcus's casket. The corners of her lips trembled almost imperceptibly before settling into quiet resolve. Whatever waited beyond those church doors, she would face it exactly as she had taught her son to face every hardship in life, with calm, with integrity, and without surrendering the dignity that no badge, no accusation, and no misunderstanding could ever take away. The church doors opened wider as cool rain drifted across the stone steps, carrying with it the scent of wet pavement and freshly cut grass from the cemetery beyond. Officer Daniel Whitaker walked several feet ahead without once looking back, completely certain that every person behind him would simply follow his commands. Years of wearing the uniform had convinced him that hesitation belonged to other people, not to him. His reputation inside the department reflected that same confidence. Fellow officers often described him as decisive, fearless, and unwilling to bend under pressure. Complaints from citizens rarely seemed to matter. Internal reviews came and went, paperwork disappeared into filing cabinets, and Whitaker always returned to patrol believing that authority itself justified every decision he made. This morning had begun like dozens before it. He had received a briefing, glanced over a thin investigative file, and accepted only the parts that confirmed his own assumptions. He barely noticed the missing pages, the incomplete witness statements, or the handwritten note requesting that all contact with Evelyn Carter be coordinated through another federal office. To Whitaker, she was simply another name connected to an active investigation. Her race, her quiet composure, and the neighborhood where she lived fit a story he had already decided was true before ever meeting her. As Evelyn stepped onto the rain-soaked sidewalk behind him, she paused only long enough to let an elderly church member pass safely down the steps. Even now, with every camera beginning to point toward her, she thanked the woman softly and adjusted the older lady's umbrella before continuing forward. The gesture lasted only seconds, but several people standing nearby exchanged puzzled looks. They expected outrage. They expected shouting. Instead, they saw kindness. Whitaker mistook that calm for weakness. He glanced over his shoulder and spoke in a clipped voice. "You have been unusually cooperative." Evelyn met his eyes for only a moment. "Respect for others should never depend on circumstances," she answered quietly. Her response irritated him more than any argument could have. He believed people either challenged authority or submitted to it. He had little experience with someone who carried dignity without resistance. Across the street, reporters adjusted camera lenses beneath plastic covers while producers whispered into headsets. None of them had yet identified Evelyn. Their news alerts simply reported police activity interrupting a funeral. Curious neighbors slowed their cars. Pedestrians stopped beneath storefront awnings. The growing audience only strengthened Whitaker's confidence. Public attention had never intimidated him. In his mind, it validated his authority. One younger officer standing beside the patrol vehicle shifted uneasily. He leaned toward Whitaker and spoke just above a whisper. "Sir, should we verify this with headquarters before we continue?" Whitaker answered without lowering his voice. "We already have enough." The younger officer looked toward Evelyn again. Something about her posture seemed strangely familiar. She stood perfectly straight despite the rain, hands folded calmly before her, eyes observant but never confrontational. She looked less like someone cornered by circumstances and more like someone patiently allowing them to unfold. Inside the church, Reverend Samuel Brooks remained near the entrance, watching silently. He had spent decades counseling families through unimaginable grief, and experience had taught him that appearances often concealed extraordinary truths. As the patrol vehicle waited with its engine quietly humming, he whispered a prayer that justice, whatever form it eventually took, would find its way through the storm already gathering over everyone present. Rain gathered along the edge of the patrol vehicle, each drop sliding slowly across the dark paint before disappearing onto the pavement below. Officer Daniel Whitaker opened the rear door with practiced confidence and gestured toward the seat inside. Evelyn Carter stopped just short of entering. She did not raise her voice. She did not step backward. Instead, she looked directly at him with calm eyes that seemed to measure every word before it was spoken. "Officer," she said quietly, "before I enter this vehicle, may I ask one question?" Whitaker folded his arms impatiently. "Make it quick." The reporters across the street noticed the exchange immediately. Camera lenses turned toward them, and microphones lifted above the umbrellas. The younger officer beside Whitaker shifted uncomfortably again, sensing that something about the moment felt different from an ordinary detention. Evelyn glanced briefly toward the church, where Marcus's funeral still waited unfinished. The white lilies near the entrance swayed gently beneath the steady rain. She inhaled once before returning her attention to Whitaker. "Is this action based on verified evidence?" she asked softly. "Or on an assumption that has not yet been tested?" The question lingered in the damp afternoon air. It was not the question itself that unsettled the younger officers. It was the precision. The wording sounded less like fear and more like careful legal reasoning. Whitaker gave a short, dismissive laugh. "You have watched too many courtroom shows." Evelyn remained perfectly still. "Perhaps," she answered. "Or perhaps every American deserves to know why their freedom is interrupted." The younger officer looked from Whitaker to Evelyn. He quietly reached toward the investigation folder tucked beneath his arm. Something compelled him to look again at the paperwork he had accepted without reading closely. Whitaker noticed the movement immediately. "Leave the file alone," he ordered. "We already have what we need." The younger officer slowly lowered his hand, but uncertainty remained across his face. Around them, church members began gathering beneath the covered entrance. Nobody shouted. Nobody interfered. They simply watched with heavy hearts as rain softened the edges of the afternoon. Reverend Samuel Brooks stood near the doorway with folded hands. His eyes never left Evelyn. He had seen frightened people before. He had seen angry people before. What he saw now was neither. He saw remarkable restraint. Evelyn gently brushed a raindrop from the sleeve of her black dress, almost absent-mindedly. "My son believed truth survives every storm," she said quietly, not only to Whitaker, but almost to herself. "I hope he was right." Whitaker interpreted her composure as quiet surrender. He stepped closer. "Enough conversation." Get in the vehicle. Evelyn nodded politely. I will comply. She placed one hand lightly on the open door before pausing again. May I ask that my son's funeral continue without interruption? The request caught even the reporters by surprise. No demand. No complaint. Only concern for the people she was leaving behind. Reverend Brooks answered before anyone else could. It will. He called gently from the church steps. Evelyn smiled with gratitude. For only a second, sunlight pushed through the thick gray clouds, casting a faint reflection across the church windows before disappearing once more behind the rain. The younger officer quietly opened the investigation folder despite Whitaker's earlier warning. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His expression changed almost imperceptibly as he realized several sections had been removed and a bold notation at the bottom referenced additional federal coordination that was no longer attached. He slowly looked up toward Whitaker, uncertainty settling deeper into his face, while Evelyn calmly entered the patrol vehicle with the same quiet dignity she had carried from the moment she first stood beside her son's casket. The patrol vehicle door closed with a quiet, solid click that seemed far louder than it should have. Outside, the rain continued to fall in steady rhythm against the windows, blurring the faces gathered near the church entrance into soft silhouettes of black umbrellas and dark coats. Inside the vehicle, Evelyn Carter folded her hands gently in her lap and looked through the rain-streaked glass towards St. Matthew's Church. Somewhere beyond those windows, the service for her son continued without her. She imagined Reverend Samuel Brooks finishing the prayer Marcus had chosen months earlier after attending another family's memorial. Marcus had once smiled and said, "When my time comes many years from now, I do not want people remembering how I died. I want them remembering how I lived." The memory settled warmly inside her, becoming stronger than the sadness surrounding her. In the front seat, Officer Daniel Whitaker adjusted his radio and stared ahead with complete certainty. Every passing second reinforced his belief that he had acted correctly. Reporters remained outside. Cameras were recording. Everything appeared under control. Yet beside him, the younger officer quietly opened the investigation folder once more. This time he read every line carefully. His eyes moved slower with each page. The file referenced an interview that had never been completed. It listed evidence that had not yet been verified. Near the back, a bright yellow routing sheet had been removed, leaving only staple marks and a note indicating additional authorization was pending through a federal office. His heartbeat quickened. "Sir," he said cautiously, "there are missing documents." Whitaker barely turned his head. "Not our problem." The younger officer hesitated. "It could be our problem if we proceed without them." Whitaker sighed impatiently. "You are overthinking it." Evelyn remained silent, but she heard every word. She did not interrupt. She simply watched raindrops race one another down the glass, disappearing as quickly as they formed. The silence inside the vehicle became almost tangible. Finally, she spoke in the same calm voice she had used all afternoon. "Incomplete information has ended many promising careers." Neither officer answered. The younger one looked at her through the rearview mirror. There was something unsettling about how measured she sounded. She did not speak like someone hoping to escape consequences. She spoke like someone who understood them completely. His phone vibrated softly against his duty belt. He glanced down. The message came from dispatch. "Verify subject identification before transport. Await supervisory confirmation." He frowned immediately. "Sir," he said again, holding up the screen, "dispatch is asking us to verify identity." Whitaker barely looked. "We already know who she is. They specifically wrote verify." Whitaker's expression hardened. "Dispatch can wait." Outside the windshield, another black sedan rolled slowly onto the street before stopping several car lengths away. It carried no police markings, only dark windows reflecting the gray afternoon sky. The younger officer noticed it immediately. "Do you recognize that vehicle?" he asked. Whitaker shook his head without concern. "Probably another reporter." Evelyn followed the sedan with quiet eyes, but offered no explanation. She lowered her gaze again to the simple silver cross resting around her neck, touching it gently with 2 fingers before releasing it. Her composure somehow made the uncertainty inside the patrol car even heavier. The younger officer returned to the folder one last time. Tucked inside the inner pocket was a business card that had somehow escaped everyone's attention. Across the top were the words United States District Court. The name beneath them had been partially hidden by another sheet of paper. Before he could slide it free, his radio suddenly crackled with unusual urgency. Dispatch repeated the instruction, this time louder and unmistakably firm. Unit 12, stop transport immediately. Confirm the identity of Evelyn Carter before taking any further action. Supervisor en route. The younger officer slowly lifted his eyes toward Whitaker. For the first time that afternoon, certainty disappeared from the patrol car, replaced by a silence that felt much colder than the rain outside. The radio fell silent again, but its final words lingered inside the patrol vehicle like an echo that refused to disappear. Rain continued tracing slow paths across the windshield, softening the flashing reflections from nearby news cameras until every light looked distant and uncertain. No one spoke for several long moments. Even Officer Daniel Whitaker remained unusually still, his hand resting on the steering wheel while the engine idled quietly beneath them. Evelyn Carter closed her eyes for the first time that afternoon. She was not retreating from the moment. She was remembering another rainy day nearly 20 years earlier when Marcus was only 7 years old. He had come home from school carrying a soaked backpack after giving his umbrella to another little boy who had forgotten his own. She had asked him why he chose to walk home in the rain. Marcus had smiled and answered, "Because someone else needed to stay dry more than I did." That simple sentence had become one of the quiet foundations of her life. It reminded her that character revealed itself most clearly when no reward could be expected. She opened her eyes again and watched tiny drops gather along the edge of the side window before falling away one by one. Outside, the church bells rang softly, signaling that the funeral service was reaching its closing prayer. She imagined friends surrounding Marcus's casket, speaking about his laughter, his patience, and the way he always noticed people others overlooked. She hoped no one would remember the interruption more than they remembered the man they had come to honor. In the front seat, the younger officer slowly removed his cap and rested it on his knees. His breathing had become noticeably slower. He glanced once more at the partially hidden business card inside the folder, but did not pull it free. Something told him the truth was already approaching without his help. Whitaker finally broke the silence. "You have been unusually calm all day." Evelyn looked toward the rain instead of toward him. "Grief teaches you which battles deserve your voice," she answered gently. "The others can wait." Whitaker frowned, unable to understand how someone facing public embarrassment could remain so composed. He had expected anger, accusations, or demands. Instead, he found only restraint. That restraint unsettled him far more than resistance ever could. The younger officer quietly asked, "Are you worried about what happens next?" Evelyn offered the faintest smile. "Everyone should care about what happens next," she replied. "Not only for themselves, but for every person who trusts our institutions to seek truth before reaching conclusions." Her words settled heavily inside the vehicle. No one challenged them. Beyond the windshield, the black sedan that had arrived earlier remained parked beneath a large oak tree. Its headlights stayed off. Its occupants made no effort to approach. They simply waited with remarkable patience. The rain began to ease, leaving only scattered drops falling from the church roof onto the stone walkway below. Sunlight slowly filtered through the thinning clouds, casting a pale silver glow across the wet pavement. The entire street seemed to exhale after holding its breath for far too long. Evelyn gently touched the silver cross around her neck once more and whispered almost too quietly to hear, "Marcus, kindness still matters." The younger officer lowered his eyes, unexpectedly moved by words that carried neither bitterness nor blame. Somewhere in the distance, another vehicle turned onto the street. It did not arrive with flashing lights or rushing tires. It approached slowly, deliberately, as though every person inside already understood the importance of what was about to unfold. Whitaker watched it through the windshield, uncertainty beginning to replace confidence for the very first time, while Evelyn remained exactly as she had been since leaving the church, quiet, patient, and completely unshaken. The approaching vehicle rolled to a smooth stop behind the patrol car, without sirens or urgency, its dark exterior reflecting the fading rain like polished glass. A second sedan followed, then another. None carried local police markings. Their doors opened almost in unison. Men and women dressed in dark business suits stepped onto the wet pavement with quiet purpose. Their polished shoes splashed lightly through shallow puddles as they walked toward the patrol vehicle. The younger officer instinctively straightened in his seat. Something about their discipline felt unmistakably official. Officer Daniel Whitaker opened his door and stepped outside, his confidence returning as he adjusted his uniform. "Can I help you?" he called. The woman leading the group did not answer immediately. She carried a slim leather portfolio embossed with the seal of the United States District Court. Beside her walked a tall man wearing a dark overcoat with a small badge clipped discreetly beneath his lapel. He stopped several feet from Whitaker and spoke in an even, controlled voice. "Which officer initiated the detention of Evelyn Carter?" Whitaker answered without hesitation. "I did." The man nodded once. "On whose authorization?" Whitaker lifted the investigation folder. "Active investigation." The younger officer stepped from the passenger side, holding the same folder, his expression far more uncertain than before. The woman in the business suit extended her hand. "May I see the file?" After only a brief glance through its contents, her expression changed. She slowly closed the folder and looked directly at Whitaker. "This package is incomplete." Whitaker folded his arms. "We were instructed to proceed." "By whom?" she asked. Silence answered her question. She turned toward the rear door of the patrol vehicle and gently knocked once on the window. Evelyn looked up calmly. The woman offered a respectful nod before opening the door herself. "Good afternoon, Your Honor." The words seemed to stop the entire street. The younger officer's eyes widened. One reporter lowered his microphone in confusion. Even the church members watching from the entrance exchanged stunned glances. Whitaker frowned. "Your Honor." The man beside the woman reached into his coat and presented official identification. "United States Marshals Service. We were dispatched after receiving notice that Judge Evelyn Carter's scheduled security coordination had been interrupted." Whitaker stared at the identification without speaking. The younger officer finally slid the hidden business card completely from the investigation folder. This time nothing covered the name. Across the top appeared the official seal of the United States District Court. Beneath it, in clear black lettering, were the words, "Honorable Evelyn Carter, United States District Judge." His face lost all color. He slowly looked toward Evelyn, then back to Whitaker, realizing the missing federal pages had never been an administrative detail. They had been the most important documents in the entire file. Evelyn stepped carefully from the patrol vehicle. Her black dress remained damp from the rain, and her silver cross rested quietly against the fabric. She made no dramatic announcement. She offered no criticism. She simply stood with the same composed dignity she had carried throughout the afternoon. The woman from the court looked at her with visible concern. "Your Honor, we are deeply sorry for this interruption, especially today." Evelyn answered softly. "My son's funeral deserves our attention first." The United States Marshal lowered his head respectfully. Around them, every conversation stopped. Reporters who had expected another ordinary police story suddenly found themselves witnessing something entirely different. Officer Daniel Whitaker remained frozen beside the patrol vehicle, the certainty that had carried him through the day disappearing beneath the weight of a truth he had never imagined. For the first time since walking into St. Matthew's Church, he realized he had not simply misunderstood a grieving mother. He had failed to recognize the quiet authority of a woman whose greatest strength had never been her title, but the character with which she had carried it. For several seconds no one moved. The only sound came from rainwater dripping from the church roof onto the stone walkway below, each drop echoing softly through the unexpected silence. Reporters lowered their cameras just enough to exchange bewildered glances. Church members stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the covered entrance, their expressions shifting from confusion to quiet understanding. Officer Daniel Whitaker remained motionless beside the patrol vehicle, his hands no longer resting with confidence at his sides. He looked at Evelyn Carter again, but this time he did not see only a grieving mother. He saw someone whose composure had never depended upon recognition. The United States Marshal stepped forward respectfully. "Your Honor, transportation has been arranged whenever you are ready." Evelyn nodded with gratitude, but she did not take a single step toward the waiting sedan. Instead, she turned her eyes back toward St. Matthew's Church. "My son is still waiting for his mother," she said gently. Nothing is more important than finishing his farewell. The marshal immediately inclined his head. Of course. The younger officer quietly closed the incomplete investigation folder. He walked toward Evelyn, holding it with both hands before offering it back to the marshal. This should never have reached the street in this condition, he admitted. His voice carried genuine regret. Evelyn accepted neither the folder nor the apology for herself. Then let today become the reason it never happens again, she answered softly. Those simple words settled deeply into everyone standing nearby. She had every opportunity to embarrass the officers in front of the cameras. She could have listed titles, demanded immediate discipline, or reminded everyone of her position. Instead, she chose restraint once again. Daniel Whitaker finally found his voice. It sounded noticeably quieter than before. Judge Carter. He stopped, searching for words that refused to come easily. The confidence that had filled his every sentence throughout the afternoon had disappeared completely. I made assumptions that I should not have made. Evelyn looked at him without anger. Yes, she replied. You did. He lowered his eyes. I interrupted your son's funeral. I am sorry. The apology hung in the cool afternoon air. It was imperfect, uncomfortable, and spoken without excuses. Evelyn studied him for a long moment before answering. An apology matters only when it changes tomorrow. Whitaker nodded slowly. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to defend. The younger officer quietly removed the temporary detention paperwork from his clipboard. Without ceremony, he placed it inside the incomplete file and closed it. Even the reporters recognized that the most important story unfolding before them was no longer about an interrupted investigation. It had become a lesson about judgment, humility, and the cost of believing that appearances revealed truth. Reverend Samuel Brooks stepped down from the church entrance carrying the white rose Evelyn had dropped earlier inside the sanctuary. A few tiny drops of rain still clung to its petals. He handed it to her with a warm smile. Marcus would want you beside him now. Evelyn accepted the flower carefully, as though it were something precious beyond measure. Thank you, Reverend. Before returning to the church, she turned once more toward Officer Whitaker. When this day is over, she said calmly, do not remember my title. Remember the mother you saw before you ever learned it. Whitaker swallowed quietly and nodded. Those words struck him more deeply than any public criticism ever could. Evelyn then walked back toward the church with slow, steady steps, the white rose resting gently in her hand, while every person watching instinctively moved aside to give her a clear path. No one announced her arrival. No one applauded. They simply stood in respectful silence as a mother returned to finish saying goodbye to her son. The church doors closed softly behind Evelyn Carter as the final prayer came to its quiet end. Warm afternoon light filtered through the stained glass, painting gentle colors across the polished wooden floor where her white rose now rested beside Marcus's casket. The sanctuary no longer carried the weight of confusion. It carried remembrance. Friends stepped forward one by one, sharing stories of the young man who had volunteered after work, shoveled snow from elderly neighbors' sidewalks without being asked, and believed that every person deserved to be treated with dignity long before they had earned admiration. Evelyn listened to every memory with folded hands and grateful eyes. She did not speak until the final hymn faded into silence. Then she stepped beside the casket and rested her fingertips lightly on its smooth surface. You kept your promise, Marcus, she whispered. You reminded people that kindness leaves a longer legacy than anger ever could. No one in the church moved. Even the children sitting near the back seemed to understand that some moments deserved complete silence. Outside, the rain had ended entirely. Sunlight reflected from the wet pavement like polished silver, and the dark clouds slowly drifted east across the Baltimore skyline. Officer Daniel Whitaker remained standing near the front steps, his patrol vehicle parked exactly where he had left it. The incomplete investigation file rested unopened beneath his arm. For the first time in many years, the weight he carried had nothing to do with paperwork. It came from realizing how quickly certainty could become injustice when compassion was absent. The younger officer approached him quietly. I have already requested that every report from today include exactly what happened, he said. Whitaker nodded slowly. Do not leave anything out. His voice was calm now, stripped of pride. Across the street, reporters packed away their cameras. Several had arrived expecting conflict. Instead, they left carrying a different story, one about restraint, humility, and the quiet strength of a grieving mother who never needed to announce who she was. As the funeral guests began leaving the church, many paused briefly beside Evelyn. Some offered hugs. Others simply touched her hand. None mentioned her judicial office. They spoke only of Marcus. Somehow, that meant more than every title she had ever carried. Before departing, the United States Marshal walked over once more. "Your Honor, the court can postpone anything you need." Evelyn smiled gently. "Justice will still be there tomorrow. Today belongs to my son." The marshal lowered his head respectfully before walking away. A cool breeze stirred the branches of the old oak trees lining the cemetery road. Their leaves shimmered softly beneath the returning sunlight. Evelyn remained alone beside Marcus's grave after everyone else had gone. She placed the white rose across the fresh flowers and looked toward the quiet horizon. There were no television cameras anymore. No uniforms. No official vehicles. Only the peaceful sound of birds returning after the storm. She closed her eyes and took one slow breath before turning toward the path leading home. Behind her, the polished headstone reflected the evening light, while ahead, the road stretched calmly into the distance. At the edge of the cemetery, Officer Daniel Whitaker stood silently with his cap in his hands. He did not call out to her. He did not interrupt her final farewell. He simply watched her walk away, understanding at last that true authority is never measured by a badge, a courtroom, or a title. It is measured by the grace a person chooses when they have every reason to choose something else. Evelyn never looked back. She did not need to. The quiet she left behind spoke more powerfully than any verdict ever could, and as the last rays of sunlight settled across the cemetery, it felt as though justice itself had arrived not with noise, but with compassion, dignity, and the enduring strength of a mother's heart.